everyone. Welcome to the Ghost Fund podcast. So the goal of this podcast is to learn more about upcoming projects and also learn more about Web3 infrastructure in general. And today I'm very happy to welcome Bo, who is the co-founder of Polymer Labs. And Polymer is the network for interoperability. So Bo, how are you doing today? Very happy to have you on the Ghost Fund podcast.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I know it's been a while since we last chatted. Really excited about the conversation today.
Yeah, same. Super excited about that. And maybe we can start with just a basic introduction for our listeners. Could you maybe just introduce a bit more your background and also your crypto journey and what led you to build Polymer?
Yeah, happy to. My name is Bo. I'm a technical co-founder at Polymer. My personal journey started in Web 2. So I worked on a lot of different high-performance database systems. I really enjoyed that arc of my career. Ended up working at Uber, left Uber to help start a company called Chronosphere, where I was a core database engineer there, and also the first hire. My crypto journey started in DeFi. It started more of as a hobby. I was just interested in learning how DeFi worked. I don't have a finance background, so I was very curious. I was like, okay, how do these financial products work on chain? It's easier for me to read code and reverse engineer how they work. So after this period of just working in DeFi for some time, I naturally gravitated back towards infrastructure. And what I realized at the time was the infrastructure to support these types of applications is quite lacking. So when I think of, the age-old question of why do I want to build this app on-chain versus off-chain? I think to really answer that question, it really feels like applications that live on-chain or make sense on-chain today kind of sit at the intersection of regulatory arbitrage and social coordination. And unfortunately, I feel like that's a small subset of applications. There are a lot of applications that exist off-chain that have viable businesses. And then the question of how do we make these off-chain or previously off-chain categories of application viable on-chain and competitive with their off-chain counterparts, that's a very hard question to answer. I think trying to solve interoperability and trying to solve it well is part of the answer. It's not the entire answer. There's obviously a lot of different teams working on trying to get us to a place where we can grow the on-chain economy. But I think interoperability is kind of where my personal interest gravitated towards. And we want to kind of do our part in this greater mission and journey for the whole space.
Yeah, that's amazing. Talking about mission, could you introduce a bit more Polymer and its mission?
Yeah, I think the mission definitely became more refined over the years. I think initially we were pretty set on trying to solve the interoperability problem. We were very focused on IBC very early. We do think that it is long-term going to be the interoperability standard that every ecosystem will end up adopting. But beyond the technology itself, we realized that we wanted to essentially answer the question that I posed before of how can we bring more of the economy on chain? And in order to do so, our thesis had to evolve. So I would say that it kind of evolved from being L1 centric. We were always bullish on app chains because coming from the a high performance database background, I realized that you need to be purpose built. I know there's this new wave of, quote unquote, purpose built L1s or purpose built rollups. And I think that's really important because you can't be good at everything. You need to make trade-offs and you need to optimize for specific things. Just as an example, Uber internally ran something like 20 plus different types of database systems, almost half of which they created on their own, and many of which turned into their own startups. One of which was Chronosphere. It was originally an open source time series database that was built at Uber. And trying to imagine, running an Uber on chain or these large scale applications on chain, you start to really buy into this app specific thesis, whether that's an app specific layer 1, which was our original thesis, or an app specific rollup, which is our current thesis. And the reason that's the case is because when you think of an L1, there's certain costs, there's a certain overhead and cost that you pay. One in terms of incentives, emissions, coordination, hardware, network, and there's a scaling ceiling. I kind of call it like a latency bottleneck with consensus. If you put like 500 nodes and you split them across the world, there's only so fast they can communicate. Like speed of light only goes so fast through fiber optic cable, and that hurts the performance of an application for the real world. So we're thinking like, okay, how do we make an app that's competitive in the real world? And latency is a big factor there, which I'm sure we'll talk about later in this pod. But trying to bring that latency down means that you can start competing. An application that's built on chain can start competing on dimensions that are at least close to or competitive with what's being built off chain. And Polymer's mission right now is to try to bring that level of latency and connectivity to rollups on Ethereum to kind of solve this problem of how do we bring more of the world on chain.
Yeah, something that I'm a bit curious about is the current architecture of Polymer. So I know that like Polymer is kind of like a mix of like the Cosmos SDK, and you're also using the OP stack. Could you explain a bit more about like this architecture, and also why did you opt for like the OP stack and then making like an optimistic rollup rather than, for example, like a ZK rollup?
So I actually think that the verification method used is irrespective of the way a rollup inherits its censorship resistance and liveness from the layer one. The censorship resistance and liveness guarantees are more of a short-term guarantee. And this is made before the rollup has been proven, quote unquote. The chain derivation logic runs in real time is what I'm saying. There's different ways that rollup frameworks do it. Arbitrum Orbit does it different than OP Stack, does it different than other frameworks. And you probably saw recently that Succinct worked on a ZK provable version of OP. So now you kind of have like, now the lines are very blurred, and I feel like we kind of, I might have talked about this in the past, but like the lines are very blurred. Like an optimistic rollup can be a ZK rollup. You can prove it however way you want, even if you want to prove it using a committee, like Lagrange. Because when you bootstrap a committee, now the way that you're proving the execution now becomes like a layer one. You have this like crypto economically secured validator set, more or less. So if we take away the way that the rollup is proved, or the way the rollup's execution is proved, we kind of picked these technologies because we didn't want to recreate or re-implement this like censorship resistance and liveness mechanism. We wanted to rely on some existing system. And OP just happened to be the best fit there. So our considerations there are that why we wanted to build a rollup, the high level goal was like, the high level reasoning for that is because we felt that in a world where we have rollups like MegaETH that are doing 1 millisecond block times, the only way you can realistically keep up with these latencies is if you are a rollup yourself, if that makes sense. Because if you have to pay the overhead of consensus, you're not going to get to that level of latency. And even if you have a committee and your committee is geographically distributed, you don't have consensus, you have a quorum, but the quorum is still network latency bound. And I'm talking about like I guess like a wormhole-like design where you have like a guardian set. To me, it's not necessarily about just the number of nodes in this set or the algorithm used to agree on something. It's also just the latency required for communicating across these nodes and across geographies. Like MegaETH obviously, I think, is really betting on the fact that this latency will unlock a new class of applications that are going to be more competitive.
No, that totally makes sense. Yeah, that's actually very interesting. Maybe just to talk about, so I recently saw one of your tweets, and you were saying that, on this tweet that we are not building for every ecosystem. We are building toward like a future that we believe in. And could you maybe, tell us a bit more about like your vision for the future and how like Polymer fits into that future?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll talk a little bit about Ethereum first. I'm not like I think I'm technology maxi. I like certain technologies for certain reasons. I'm not like a religious ecosystem, this ecosystem is the best or that ecosystem is the best. I really like to think about what are the properties of the technology that make sense for some use case. And when I think about what is the ideal base layer look like and what properties are really important for this base layer, two properties come to mind. One is liveness, and the other property is censorship resistance. When I think about liveness, I think about perpetual, or I think about the base layer being able to enable perpetual building blocks, or building blocks that exist and will continue to exist, regardless of World War III or some catastrophic world event. And then censorship resistance is the other side of the story, where you want to have unfettered access for users across the globe. And that guarantee is really hard to achieve. And it's one big differentiator for what an application built on-chain can promise, or the social contract between an application that lives on-chain versus the social contract of, let's say, Robinhood with their users, which is, yeah, sure, you can use this app until you're making too much money, and then we're going to block you until some of these hedge funds hedge their positions. So I think those two properties are really important, and I believe that Ethereum does both very well. You have an extremely large validator set. You have a very diverse set of operators of those validators, although it can be arguable. Some people argue that stake is somewhat centralized. And then on the other hand, you have this notion of, it actually has a very unique design in its consensus algorithm. It has a hybrid consensus algorithm that prioritizes liveness. A lot of people are probably, have always wondered, why doesn't Ethereum have one slot finality? Why doesn't it just prioritize finality over liveness? And my take is that if you prioritize finality over liveness, at the sake of liveness, then you're no longer a great base layer for rollups. So that's kind of why that's why we feel that Ethereum is the best base layer for this rollup centric roadmap.
No, that makes total sense. Maybe just to chat a bit more about the rollup side of things. So Polymer will be a rollup, and right now, most rollups are kind of centralized because of on the sequencer, and this has many issues on censorship resistance, on decentralization, and so on. How do you plan to decentralize that specific part, if ever you plan to decentralize that part? I would like to understand a bit more this part.
What's funny? I used to think that you had to decentralize the sequencer. Before I really understood how these rollup frameworks worked, I was like, okay, yeah, you can't have censorship resistance unless you decentralize the sequencer. And that was my mentality for some time. Because coming from the Cosmos, I'm like, oh, you have to be in a layer one to have certain level of guarantees. But as I started learning more about rollups and rollup internals, my perspective started to change a bit. So if we let's say we take the OP stack for example, the OP stack has a mechanism for deriving its chain from the layer one, where it says you as a user, you can either submit a transaction to the layer two, or you can submit a transaction to the layer one. If you submit a transaction to the layer one, it ends up in something, let's just call it like a layer one inbox. And we'll call the sequencer the layer two inbox. If you submit something to the layer one inbox, the chain or the rules of the chain derivation process require that, based on a configurable window, that the sequencer has to adopt that input from the layer one and combine it with its layer two inputs to produce a valid chain. So when I think about a layer two, I actually think about it as two inputs. I think about it as a layer one input combined with a layer two input to produce a layer two block. And there's certain configuration options. I'll walk through a few. Sorry, it's maybe somewhat technical for some folks, but I think it's important to understand. The chain can choose to derive at any point in Ethereum. So let's call this a confirmation depth, meaning that you take the head of Ethereum, you subtract it by the confirmation depth, and maybe it's 10 blocks, 15 blocks, whatever it may be. That's your gap, or that's your censorship resistance delay. in the happy path. That means that within 10 to 15 blocks or whatever the confirmation depth is, you can guarantee that if you post something to the layer 1, it's going to get included into layer 2 to make the layer 2 a valid chain. And then there's another configuration option that says, I think it's like max sequencer drift. This configuration option means that the sequencer, if it loses connectivity to the layer 1, is allowed to produce valid blocks for up until this drift. This defaults to 10 minutes, but this is configurable. So now you see this balance of, okay, you can prioritize the liveness of the layer 2 chain or the censorship resistance guarantees of the layer 2 chain, if you get what I'm saying. So if you turn this parameter down, what happens is that, like, let's say I want max censorship resistance. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say, I'm going to make the sequencer confirmation depth like very shallow. You know what? I'm just going to make it 2 blocks since I want like 24-second censorship resistant guarantees. And then I'm going to take the sequencer drift. I'm actually going to turn it off. I'm going to make it 0. That means that no drift is allowed. Meaning that if I lose connectivity to the layer 1, I cannot produce a valid block. So I lose some liveness or like a local liveness on the layer 2, but I get increased censorship resistance guarantees. So I'll walk through this just to kind of give you a sense of like, it's not black and white with censorship resistance. You don't necessarily need to decentralize a sequencer. After learning about a lot of these internals, I realized that you can have a centralized sequencer. You can get like pretty good censorship resistance properties, and then you can crank up that sequencer and get this big fat sequencer like a lot of these high performance layer 2s are doing, and trade off for performance, which from the perspective of an app actually make building on-chain more viable than like, oh, let's decentralize every part of the stack and like just for the purpose of decentralizing it without really understanding what properties and what trade-offs that it enables and how can it enable us or enable builders to make building on-chain more viable.
Okay, yeah, that's super interesting. I'm curious about what is your take right now on like based rollup? Because this is something that many people have been chatting about like recently. So I'm curious about like your take on it.
Yeah, I think base rollups are interesting. I don't think that there's this big divide between base rollups and non-base rollups. So this is a bit of a controversial opinion. I think I had this opinion before that like there was not that much of a difference between like an optimistic rollup and a ZK rollup, which I think for a while it was controversial. And now with like Succinct's like ZK rollup, I guess like the ability to ZK prove like these optimistic rollups that's kind of changing. The reason why I think this is because both both Arbitrum and Optimism's rollup framework can operate in both modes. I'll give you an example. So let's say you take an optimistic rollup. I will say like OP Stack, for example. They now enable like multi-proposer. Anyone can propose a new block. If you turn off the sequencer, so like let's say Optimism, I'm operating an OP Stack rollup and I turn off my sequencer. There's a configuration option called sequencer window size. It defaults to about 12 hours. You can configure this, of course. If I turn off the sequencer, for up until the sequencer window size or default 12 hours, after that point, every L2 block is generated only from L1 inputs. In the OP Stack, in their docs, they call this a deposit-only block. They call it a deposit only because normally these L1 transactions are only for deposit transactions. But in the extreme case, like you could use this inbox for any type of transaction. And now what you see is that, okay, wow, I've just turned my OP Stack rollup into a base rollup. So if I really want to do this, I'll set up a rollup with a sequencer window size of 0 and never run the sequencer and let people just sequence blocks from the L1. I don't recommend people do this, but you can do. The fact that you can do this means that the two rollups are not so different to each other. Arbitrum's mechanism is a little bit different. Their mechanism is that after I'll say like a delay period where the sequencer is down, or like censoring L1 transactions, that you can force include transactions from, they call it like a slow inbox or an L1 inbox. They call the L1 inbox a slow inbox, and they call the L2 inbox the fast inbox. You can force include transactions from this slow inbox into this fast inbox. And essentially, like if that's all you do, every single force include transaction creates like a sequence batch, meaning that it creates a new block, L2 block essentially. This is very inefficient because you're, as far as I can tell, you're creating like one transaction blocks, but you can technically turn an Arbitrum orbit rollup into a base rollup as well. With that's highly inefficient. I think OP Stack's mechanism here is a little bit more efficient because you're doing it. So it's a per block relationship. So you get like a single block from a block worth of L1 inputs, which is a little bit more efficient.
No, I see. Yeah, no, that's actually super interesting. I would like to talk a bit more about maybe on the like bridge side and interoperability, and maybe some like challenges that some operability like protocols can face. Usually, what comes like quite often is around like chain integrations. For example, like a bridge. Let's say, okay, wormhole. It takes usually a lot of time for like this kind of like protocol to integrate a new chain, and it could be also quite costly. So I'm just wondering how will it be for Polymer, and how easy will it be for you guys to integrate, let's say, a new rollup or potentially like a new L1?
Yeah, I would say that coming from the Cosmos, and looking at IBC and their approach to building essentially like IBC client, or I'm just going to like remove that part and just call them verification templates. I think that term is probably more generally understood. Means that it's much faster to create a template for verification that's reproducible than having to bootstrap a security committee for every single chain that you want to integrate. Because there's a tenement-like client in the Cosmos, it's relatively easy to add a new chain because you already have this template for validating their consensus. We've taken a similar approach to building verification templates for rollups. One of the verification templates that we built is, I would call it like a sequencer peer-to-peer verification template, meaning that we can verify the sequencer's peer-to-peer payloads, which are signed by the sequencer for OP Stack rollups. This means that it's very easy for us to adopt or connect to new OP Stack rollups. It's just a matter of knowing who the active validator set, or in this case, the sequencer, is, and being able to verify the specific format of the payload that they're signing and so on. So I would say it's relatively easy to add new chains, and it's fast for us to expand.
Okay, that makes sense. And maybe for, let's say, L1s, because like Polymer is also like using IBC. Let's say for Cosmos, like Cosmos SDK blockchains, I guess it will also be like super easy for you guys to connect, like let's say an OP rollup to like Cosmos L1. Will it be the case?
It's easier for us to connect a Cosmos chain to us because we'll run a tenement-like client. We can set up a connection. Yeah. That's all very straightforward. Going from us to a Cosmos chain, we're working with Lagrange on a state committee solution. The state committee itself kind of acts as like a validator set. This means that they can bootstrap a client for Polymer that doesn't require implementing like a rollup fraud-proof bridge, which we've also implemented. That's just going to take a lot longer. Obviously, there's trade-offs here. You can wait a really long time for a fraud provability of the rollup, or you can use a committee and have faster or slightly lower latency. Although I want to clarify that there's a trade-off here. Us building as a rollup means that it's less efficient for us to connect two layer ones to each other than it is for a sovereign protocol like a wormhole or Axelar or so on. Because for them, their chain has independent consensus or independent quorum, and our chain is dependent on Ethereum for its consensus. So because we're dependent on Ethereum for consensus, we're stuck at Ethereum finality if we sit between two layer ones. So that makes it objectively worse. Like, do you want to like go from layer one to layer one and wait 12 to 16 minutes, or do you want to go from layer one to layer one and wait a few seconds? But what this does means is that it helps us going from layer two to layer two, which we can talk about later in this podcast. So there's a trade-off here for our architecture.
Yeah, no, totally. Okay, there's something that I would like to talk about because like IBC is at the like heart of Polymer, and right now, I mean, I'm like coming from the Cosmos side, and like Chorus One is also like running a bunch of Cosmos SDK blockchains, and right now the issue that we have, especially around IBC, is that right now in terms of incentivization for relayers, it's very hard to have that on chain. Usually, how it works right now is you have validators that decide to run some relayers from and like I don't know pick up packets from blockchain A to blockchain B. And usually, how it works is that the foundation they either have some I don't know off-chain deals with validators, or they decide to I don't know delegate more tokens to that specific validator so that they can provide that services, these services, relaying services. I mean, what is your opinion right now on like IBC and maybe for you with like Polymer? Do you have any idea on how you can like potentially incentivize those relayers? I'm like really curious about that. Because yeah, I think this is like an issue that we've been facing on Cosmos for a while. Like IBC is amazing, but it's like right now, I mean, with its current status, it's not really sustainable, in my opinion. So yeah, I'm like quite curious about your opinion on that.
Yeah, I think there's many different ways to go about it. The approach in the Cosmos today is, I think the only one that I guess it sort of exists, is ICS29. It kind of creates this open fee market for relayers. There's various reasons why it like hasn't gotten adoption. There's like the channel upgradability problem that they were dealing with, and other things. And I think for us, we have various approaches to this in across Ethereum rollups, and one of the approaches does involve a fee market. So an open fee market means that any relayer can kind of come in and pick off and compete to earn these fees. Another approach that we're considering in the long term is essentially being able to contract with different like infra providers, meaning that you can have, when I think of like an AVS, I think of a more of kind of like a social contract between an infra provider and an infra customer. And Sriram talks a lot about like AVSs as like, oh, decentralized cloud, we're building AWS. These are like SaaS services. And when I think about relayer services, they kind of, in my opinion, they kind of fall into this category of like some off-chain thing that you want to ensure some quality of service for some price point that perhaps could be dynamic, could be some sort of market for that as well. And I think in this model, perhaps instead of like an open fee market, you can move to a model where there's a AVS-based fee market where you can contract with one or two or multiple infra providers that will assure some quality of service and have some, I'll say, like economic slashing if that quality of service is not achieved. The reason why I say that we probably need an AVS for this is that the slashing conditions is probably intersubjective, meaning that you have to subjectively agree on what the quality of service or where the quality of service fell short. And then you can kind of measure it because you can say like, it's actually on like this chain. These are the numbers. Here's where the quality of service fell short. Okay, we can actually slash on this. That's probably the future that we're looking at, but like I don't think that's going to happen in like the next few years. It's probably going to be like just open fee market based for now. It's a little bit simpler to implement, and then in the long term we can move to these like more complex models.
Yeah, I see. No, totally, I see. That's super interesting. Maybe just to also talk more about like the interoperability as well. I'm like quite curious about what kind of like challenging you've been facing over time, like when building an interoperable protocol.
Yeah, I think the main challenges for us going into Ethereum were when you're working with L1s, the way you think about interoperability is very different from when you're dealing with rollups. When I was dealing with layer ones, I think of, okay, there's the consensus of a chain. Okay, I just need to know how to verify the consensus. Once I verify the consensus, I can infer all these other security properties of the chain. I think Sriram does a great job of breaking down the security properties of a chain into 5 different properties, 2 liveness properties, and 3 safety properties. The liveness properties, I'll say ledger growth, which is like the liveness of the chain. And I would say some of the safety properties include like reorg resistance, data availability, and validity. And I think when you think about all these properties and how they map to a rollup, these properties actually need to get broken up into separate parts. Because for LL1, when you verify consensus, you're actually inferring all of these security properties. Consensus or verifying the consensus of the chain tell me or answer all these questions. But when I deal with a rollup, one thing, like verifying one thing may not infer these other properties, meaning that if you just verify the validity of the rollup through various means, whether it's a ZK proof, whether it's an optimistic fraud proof, whether it's using some sort of committee, like attestation committee, it does not infer whether or not you've achieved data availability. Depending on the type of methodology used, it doesn't infer whether you've achieved reorg resistance, censorship resistance, or liveness. And these parts of the protocol are really tricky to design for. We had to really dig into the internal implementation details of all these different rollups to really try to account for and handle all these properties. In production today, there's a number of interop protocols that do sub 30-second latency, or I guess it's configurable latency for how you relay between two chains. And right now, the reorg risk or any risk associated with going at that latency is offloaded to the application itself. And we really wanted to solve this problem fundamentally in the interop protocol level. So we came up with a protocol that accounts for all of these other security properties. And I kind of broke it down in a recent ETH research post that is probably a little bit too long, where you have validity, which is the guarantee that most people talk about today, which people have innovated upon this, whether they're using a committee. And now you see a lot of these committees adding crypto economic security, which is great. And then you have this local ordering guarantee, which actually covers liveness, censorship resistance, and partially reorg resistance. And then you have this global ordering guarantee, which covers like global reorg resistance and data availability. And these two levels of guarantees obviously happen at different latencies. The protocol that we built covers for both all these local ordering guarantee properties, which I try to coin as like a stage one level of security for rollup interoperability. And also in the future, we'll cover stage two, which is these global ordering guarantees across these different rollups. The local ordering guarantee has an assumption that the sequencer is not malicious, while the global ordering guarantee does not require an assumption on the sequencer being non-malicious, meaning that for the global ordering guarantee, you can add in a stronger validity mechanism and have kind of like a bulletproof guarantee that this rollup execution is valid and will stay in the same way, and it will stay ordered in the same way that it was expressed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Okay, that's true. Okay, maybe also to stay a bit more on like the rollup side of things. Let's say, right now, I would say our industry is like moving more towards like ultra scalable infrastructure. I mean, it started with like Solana. Now it's also we also have like other layer ones doing like also super scalable infrastructure like Aptos, Monad, and so on. And now we start seeing also like the same thing, but on rollups. For example, we have like Mega ETH that is also planning to have like mostly competing around like transaction per second. And we're also having, let's say, rollups that are also using like the SVM in order to make like that architecture more scalable and so on. I'm just curious because it's like now it's clear that our industry is moving that way. So how do you plan to fit in that in this, I would say, like how Polymer is planning to like support all those, let's say, super scalable rollup.
Yeah. In addition to these really scalable rollups, you also see existing rollups going faster and faster. Like Arbitrum orbit chains, I think they do like 200 milliseconds. I think they probably can do faster. I think, with a rollup, if you have a centralized sequencer, it's technically as fast as you want it to be. And like this trend, I think will continue because from like a latency perspective, latency matters to build a competitive application. There's been a lot of studies done by Amazon and a lot of major companies on the impact and drop off or user drop off rates due to latency. And on the infra side, I would say that to design for this world of low latency low latency chains, low latency applications built across these chains, you need to really hone in on the I guess like the stage one of rollup interop security that I outlined, which is achieving strong local ordering guarantees on top of some validity guarantee. And this really matters because at like mega-ETH's 1 millisecond block latency, the only guarantee that you have at that point is a sequencer level guarantee. And if you want a bunch of like rollups to compose with one another at that latency, you're pretty much still operating off of sequencer level guarantees. And the reason why we built the protocol this way is because if we can account for this sequencer level guarantee or this local ordering guarantee in a correct way, in a safe way, then we can allow like really low latency communication across all these rollups on the order of milliseconds or seconds. This would be a huge unlock for applications building on top. Obviously, the trust model is very different, and it's just a trade-off that you need to make if you want to build something fast versus something that's slower but more provable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Maybe just to understand a bit more on the Polymer architecture, do you guys have like any VM? Do you like plan to have like, I don't know, application building like on top of it? How would that work exactly?
Yeah, so we don't have a VM. We're just vanilla Cosmos SDK at the application layer. If we do adopt a VM, it would be at most for perhaps building like some IBC middleware, some additional logic. I don't think we would support applications building on Polymer directly. The goal is not to like siphon off applications from the chains that we connect, but rather to support applications on existing chains.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, that totally makes sense. Yeah. I would like to also chat a bit more on like the OpenStack and, like this kind of like Superchain ecosystem. I know that apparently Optimism is potentially working on like a bridge for like the Superchain ecosystem. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so the way it works is roughly at that stage one level of guarantee where the sequencer is making essentially like pre-confirmations to a dependency set of Superchain rollups. I think their plan is to have like the top end Superchain chains join into this single dependency set, and everyone kind of saying, okay, we all trust each other's sequencers. We're agreeing to communicate with each other. You can add additional, like back to this security model again, you can add additional validity guarantees after these sequencers have posted data to Ethereum. But that means that you're waiting a lot longer for them to communicate, meaning that they'll likely be able, it's under active development, but they'll likely be able to support different levels of communication where you say like, hey, I want to communicate really fast. I'm okay with the sequencer guarantee. Obviously there's trade-offs there. And I want to communicate like pretty much instantly. Okay, you can get that performance, you have to make the trade-off. And then you can also say, hey, I want ZK provability. I want a really hard or really strong validity guarantee, but I'm going to end up having to wait at least a few minutes, if not more than that. Because some of these rollups don't post data every few minutes. Some of them post data every 30 minutes, every hour. You might end up waiting a really long time. If you're okay with that, you want strong validity guarantee, you can make that trade-off. And then also the way we design Polymer is very similar as well. You can also trade off between this like speed and trust model essentially to get the kind of behavior that you want. So like go really fast with a sequencer guarantee, or go a lot slower with other or stronger validity guarantee. And the way I kind of see, sorry. Oh,
no, go ahead. Sorry.
The way I kind of see Polymer fitting into this Superchain ecosystem is that I see us extending the Superchain standard and extending Superchain connectivity, meaning that like the dependency set, it has some limitations. And what you'll likely see is clusters forming of Superchain rollups. And Polymer's goal is to be able to connect across these clusters and across the core cluster of the Superchain to the rest of the Superchain, kind of bringing all the Superchain together, as well as with other ecosystems like the Arbitrum ecosystem, the various ZK rollup ecosystems. We want to be able to connect all these ecosystems together at very fast, low latency speeds.
What's the, let's say, the end game for interoperability in your opinion?
I think the end game from interoperability is going to look very different than it is today. I have this like mental model of like what you need to build an application and kind of thinking in terms of building blocks. And when I think about Web 2, I think about, okay, you have these infrastructure building blocks that you can pull off the shelf, that you can run yourself, be it like your Postgres or like your regular like open source database systems, open source like API frameworks, and so on. And then you have these like software as a service APIs, which are application building blocks that you can compose together and create this novel application. And I think in Web3, we're going to move towards this world where folks are going to be taking multiple application building blocks, multiple infra building blocks, whether they're pulling a few eigenlayer AVSs off the shelf, they're pulling like the Cosmos SDK off the shelf, they're pulling a few of these app rollups off the shelf as like their like APIs that they're leveraging, and then they're going to build these new primitives on top. And because you're streaming together all these different like rollup level like building blocks, you really need this low latency connectivity between them, and that's kind of what I think like Polymer's niche is going to be, and where we're really going to hone in on, because in the long term, I think that there's not just going to be a single mega ETH. I think there's going to be many mega ETHs or mega ETH like rollups in each region. And you need this like super fast low latency connectivity between these rollups in that region. Like let's say you deploy like a cluster of these rollups to New York City to power like your New York City user base for some real-time app that they're using. Perhaps it's like an Uber. And you have some deployed in like Los Angeles, you have some deployed in like London, and all these different regions. And you need like really low, like milliseconds of latency connectivity between intra-cluster in the clusters themselves. And then you need as fast as you can get, which is probably like tens or hundreds of milliseconds connectivity across these clusters, across these regions. And I see that Polymer is not just going to be a single rollup. We're actually going to be more of like this like infrastructure tool that you can pull off the shelf. Hey, take this rollup, deploy it into your cluster, connect your cluster. There's a few that operate globally that connect clusters already. You can leverage those as like your cross-region backbone. And within a certain region, you can like deploy as many Polymer instances as you would like, as needed to connect all of the infra that you're building. And like these, Polymer deployments are seamlessly interconnected or interconnectable with existing deployments of Polymer, so that your building blocks can work with other people's building blocks and so on.
That's Could you tell us a bit more about like the current status of Polymer and maybe like your roadmap over the coming like weeks and months?
Yeah, so I would say that we have a lot of exciting news coming up in the next few months. We're prepping for a mainnet launch, so it's mainnet soon. I can't give an exact date yet, but it's coming soon, and we're really trying to like hone in and target and try to win the Ethereum rollup market first, because that's kind of where our thesis lies, and also kind of like build for this future that I talked about with super low latency connectivity across all of these different rollup ecosystems.
Great. Maybe just a question that is a bit more personal, but I'm just curious, how's the life as a co-founder? What was like, I don't know, did you get like, what were like the challenges, like maybe the difficulties, and what's good about like being a co-founder?
I think I didn't found Polymer to found a company. I think I ended up founding Polymer naturally because of the scale and scope of the problem that I was trying to solve. And I think the biggest struggle for me personally has been transitioning from a like engineering, like individual contributor focused role, which my previous life plan was to, just become a really high level IC, become like a distinguished engineer at some big tech company and then just work on really interesting problems all the time. I love solving problems. It's great. And transitioning to like needing to do other business functions, like writing more, like, trying to craft a vision, trying to sell that vision, trying to like communicate what we're building. These things aren't necessarily exactly the same as like solving deep technical problems. They're interesting in their own way, but I feel like I've kind of had to like improve and iterate on how to, tackle these problems, which honestly are much more important to your project's success than how good your tech is. I think any like IC engineer generally is likely to err on the side of, if we build great tech, they will come. but you also need distribution, and distribution matters a lot. So these other business functions are super critical, and I like these days I find myself like spending way more time on those things, which I think are absolutely necessary. So it's just been an interesting transition going from one to the other.
Now, regarding writing more, you should definitely write more. I mean, all your papers are always like amazing. I remember like your post on like ETH research. It was like few years ago now, like about like bringing IBC to Ethereum. So I remember that super well, and then I learned more about like Polymer. So yeah, all your ratings are amazing. So please keep doing that and keep writing a bit more. It's always like super amazing reading your articles.
Yeah, I can't take too much credit there. I feel like there's some level like intellectual like shyness where you're writing something, and like from your perspective, like sometimes I write these things and I feel like it's kind of like a technical shitpost, and I'm just like brain dumping my thoughts into some piece of paper. So like it's always great to hear when people like read them and find these ideas and these concepts interesting. Yeah, it's definitely not like expected. It's definitely unexpected from my end when people actually do find these things like super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this is also like a good way to attract like mindshare, because I don't know, mindshare, sorry, because yeah, maybe at some point someone will read like your I don't know your article and would like to learn more about like Polymer, and they think that their project would fit with Polymer, and this is how you can like also attract like other project building.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think this is super interesting. Yeah,
absolutely.
Talking about like writing and thoughts, what's your most controversial take right now at the moment?
Oh, most controversial take. I think the base rollup versus non-base rollup one is probably like somewhat spicy. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Actually, I got one for you. I feel like everyone bull posts ZK. Like I see so many people posting like, oh, ZK is the Endgame. Like ZK will like consume the world. It'll consume everything. And I am a ZK bull. Like I was one of the big reasons why I ended up working in crypto is because I was at least somewhat ZK pilled, and I really love the technology. I have a lot of respect for all the ZK builders out there. But from a practical perspective, I also appreciate that, perhaps we don't need to ZK everything, and that ZK comes at a certain cost. And I thought about this cost recently, and when I think about a rollup, I think about a rollup as you're in this room where the only way to exit are these doors that are blocked by either like ZK proofs, someone running a full node, or an optimistic fraud proof. And then I had to ask myself the question of, okay, when does it make sense to like perhaps like ZK prove a rollup like base? I think I just like off the shelf like looked at Succinct's numbers, looked at base, like transaction throughput going through base today. I was like, okay, maybe it'd roughly take like $9 to $10 million a year to ZK prove base. And I was like, okay, from a business perspective, like when would this $10 million cost be justified? And then I was thinking of, okay, well, there's fast liquidity bridges from like the layer 1 to layer 2 run by like Across and these other folks. And if Across takes like, a few basis points or maybe tens of basis points on these transactions, then if, it costs $10 million, then you would need at least like maybe a few $100 million of bridge volume to justify these costs, where like actually like it would make more economic sense to like use ZK proofs instead of a fast liquidity bridge like across. And then when I think about it in the context of like a mega ETH, and a mega ETH is like doing like, let's say it's doing 100K TPS, and I'm like fudging these numbers right now, so like don't
yeah.
This is like really like hand wavy back of the envelope math. I'm just doing like a linear like upscaling of the cost here. Like let's say like we have a mega ETH, it would actually cost like a few $100 billion to prove mega ETH, like based on if we do linearly scale the proving cost, which I don't think it's going to linearly scale. These numbers are probably like way off, but like I'm like, okay, if it costs a few $100 billion to prove, and like Ethereum's market cap is like that much.
Yeah.
Does it really make sense to prove? So I think like long term, as proving costs come down, I think the economic calculation of like, do I use a fast liquidity bridge like across between L1 and L2, or do I use a ZK proofs to kind of prove the native bridge, start to make a lot more sense in various cases where there's a lot of like high value economic activity, lower TPS. But if there's like low economic, so if there's low economic activity, high TPS, then like the calculation kind of swings in another direction. So I think there's like a place for both technologies. I think we need to be pragmatic and practical about how we think about things. I don't like it when people are just like championing like everything is ZK or everything is this or everything is that. Like I think those viewpoints are agenda driven and not coming from a place of pragmatism.
Yeah. No, totally. I like your take. I also think that like people are just using like ZK a bit everywhere, mostly for a buzzword and like because people are like interested in ZK and start to be like the new trend. But yeah, shouldn't like just use ZK everywhere. I like your take. Maybe just a last question because we just have a few minutes left.
Okay.
But maybe do you have like any last word for, I don't know, like people that would like to learn more about Polymer, or maybe like some potential project that would like to work with you guys?
Yeah, I think for projects that are like interested in building in the Ethereum ecosystem, we actually have two products. We have the Polymer product, which connects different rollups together, and we have this like low latency rework protection protocol in place that's novel, that allows you to communicate safely across all these different rollups quickly. And then we have another product called Monomer. Monomer is actually what Polymer is built upon. So the Monomer thesis is, if you think of building a chain, if you want to build an app chain, you want to build something that's like quote unquote purpose built, we think that Cosmos SDK is hands down the best framework for doing that. Like I said, I'm a technology maximalist based on the technologies that I've used and that I've loved. And Marco and his team are doing a fantastic job over there at improving the Cosmos SDK. So I think long term, if folks either want to like build an app on mini chains, connect them, or build an app specific rollup, I think Monomer, a combination of Monomer and the Cosmos SDK is probably one of the best tools that you can use to build that, to build something that's like truly differentiated from what exists on Ethereum today. And I think Story's story, no pun intended, is like a testament to that. I think Jason, one of the co-founders there, wrote this Twitter post about how when they try to do this, when they tried to do the protocol in the EVM, they were stuck at one layer of dependencies. And I was like, wow, that's like for a huge graph problem, and you need to build a massive IP graph, like that is not practical. And then when they build the same algorithm in using the Cosmos SDK, they were able to scale to like many layers in their IP graph, which means that like for any reasonable applications of scale, trying to solve these really hard problems, novel problems, the Cosmos SDK and Monomer is probably your better bet than going with like a vanilla EVM rollup setup.
That's amazing. Yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts, Bo. I think, we'll just end the podcast here. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to come to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Kam. It was a pleasure.